Across the wires and through the air, those who seek will find me there. Story, wonder, voice, and art, find the ears and find the heart. Welcome, dear listener, to Wishcrafting. I'm Wishamaya, your guide through the next chapter of Arthurian legend. In this episode, we are entering the realm of Guinevere and Morgana, two women who stand at the very heart of the Arthurian landscape, and whom, frankly, I've been dying to introduce you to. Their names are notorious, but beyond the familiar lies a deeper current of story, land, and mystery. Tonight, we'll uncover the feminine core of Arthurian sovereignty, queens and witches and fate weavers and healers, women who embody the spirit of the land and the turning of destiny. In Welsh, Guinevere can be translated as White Phantom or White Fae. The very name shimmers with otherworldly essence. Part mortal queen, part spectral goddess of the land. Early Welsh tradition hints that Guinevere was more than a king's consort. She appears as an earth goddess figure, linked to the triple goddess archetype. In fact, Welsh bards spoke of 3 Guineveres married to Arthur, 3 queens of the same name. Such details whisper that Guinevere's character may descend from a divine sovereignty figure, the personification of the land's power that a king must unite with in order to legitimize his reign. In the old story of Cullach and Owen, Arthur lists Guinevere among his most prized possessions. And I know, gag, but consider the symbolism. Among Arthur's treasures, which are many, he has lots of weapons, lots of warriors, lots of lands, is his queen. As precious and as potent as any magical sword. Perhaps she was seen as a trophy of an otherworldly conquest, a fairy queen won from beyond our realm, granting Arthur the right to rule. Indeed, some legends even suggest that Arthur took Guinevere from the otherworld as part of securing his kingship. In this light, Guinevere embodies sovereignty herself, the land's favor given form. This very old Celtic idea holds that no mortal king could rule unless wed to the goddess of the land. And in this version of the story, where Arthur takes Guinevere from the other world, Guinevere was not just queen, but also the land's representative, the sacred partner without whom the king's power would falter completely. Through this lens, Guinevere's story gleams with an ancient kind of magic. Stay with me here, and let's picture Guinevere on her wedding day to Arthur. Arthur reaches out to take her hand, and as he does, he's not merely taking a bride, but he's also symbolically wedding Britain, Celtic Britain, but Britain. The hall of Camelot fills with rejoicing, as the king and the land are united again. Knights cheer, trumpets sound, but on a deeper level, an ancient pact is sealed between king and land through his queen. With Guinevere by Arthur's side, the realm prospers. In the stories that tell of Arthur and Guinevere's wedding, she's often portrayed as gracious and radiant as the summer sun, a fitting counterpart to Arthur's might. In some versions, her very touch and presence are said to bring peace and fertility to the kingdom, as if the earth itself responds to the queen's mood. Yet, the legends of Guinevere are complex. She is no static statue. She's deeply human and struggles and has emotions, all of which drive the story forward. Medieval romances often reduced her to the beautiful queen who fell in love with Lancelot and betrayed her marriage to Arthur. But earlier hints show her other facets. For example, Welsh tales remember a fateful split between Guinevere and her younger sister, who's also named Guinevere. The enmity between the two sisters was so bitter that it was blamed for sparking Arthur's final battle at Camelot, the one that mortally wounds him and leaves him going to the other world for the foreseeable future. With Arthur's departure into the other world, the kingdom of Camelot falls, all because there was no harmony with the queen or queens. How telling is it that in Welsh memory, the end of Arthur's reign wasn't only about men and swords, but about a rupture in the feminine balance. It suggests that when the queenly current is fractured, the land itself responds and is torn apart. Even her famed infidelity, the affair she has with Lancelot, can be reinterpreted through this ancient lens. One puzzling Welsh story labels Guinevere as a faithless wife, seemingly out of nowhere, as stories before this gave absolutely no indication of her ever having infidelity. Some scholars speculate that this shift might echo a ritual role from pre-Christian tradition, where the representative of the land's goddess might take a new consort periodically in a ritual cycle of renewal. If Guinevere had divine origins in this land goddess, this ancient land goddess, and we'll get to that, we'll get more into that, her faithlessness could hint at a sovereignty goddess choosing a new champion, rather than it being a mere mortal lapse. Later storytellers, having a vital piece of the puzzle missing, moralized this concept with the morals of the times and turned it into the adulterous saga with Lancelot that we love to condemn today. And so, the medieval chroniclers and bards wove Guinevere's tale in divergent ways. To Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century, she was a great beauty, educated in a duke's household. Yet, in his account, she betrays Arthur with Mordred, Arthur's nemesis, bringing the downfall of the realm. In other French-inspired romances, she becomes the center of a very grand and tragic love, the queen who loves the greatest knight, and thus breaks the heart of the greatest king, and thus causes the fall of the greatest kingdom. In Thomas Malory's La Mort d'Arthur, The Death of Arthur, her affair with Sir Lancelot is portrayed as the key that unlocks Camelot's ruin. It's not a great picture they paint, but it is a powerful narrative of human passion and error. However, it does obscure the older, more mystical aspects of who Guinevere is. Those land goddess roots that link her to sovereignty are seemingly non-existent. Because, like I said, they were missing a lot of key elements that would help them understand the players in King Arthur's court a little bit more as they were intentioned to be known and understood. As representatives for the way we exist in the world, the connection to spirituality, the connection to the land, the connection to the gods, all of those pieces seemingly fade away and turn into a more fantastical storyline juxtaposed over medieval morals around the medieval era. Beneath the later mortal tales, Guinevere remains the queenly current of Arthur's story, the very life force of sovereignty. Because once a land goddess, always a land goddess. When she's aligned with Arthur, the kingdom shines, and when she's estranged or taken, the kingdom falters. So, no matter the tale and no matter the time, those ancient roots echo. There's an old tale of someone named Malagant, a shadowy king of the Summerlands or the realm of Faerie, who abducts Guinevere and holds her in a tower. Arthur has to ride out and retrieve her, sometimes by force, and sometimes with the help of a holy man who negotiates peace. Either way, the significance is very clear in this story. Without the queen, Arthur's rule is broken. He does not have the blessing of the land itself, and therefore is not a fit king without her. In one poetic imagining, when Guinevere is stolen away into the other world, the entire land of Britain grieves, crops wither, and Arthur's army loses its certainty. Her eventual return signals the restoration of harmony in the land and is widely celebrated. A sometimes subtle and sometimes not so subtle notion that the king's prosperity derives from the queen's favor. As one modern commentator puts it, Arthur ultimately falls when he, quote, no longer has favor of the sovereignty goddess in the form of his dear wife, Guinevere, end quote. Through centuries of storytelling, Guinevere has been many things. A wise queen, a passionate lover, a wronged wife, a penitent nun, even a villain in some harsher tales. These are the changing masks of a figure who began as a goddess. Yet, if we listen to the living tradition in Wales, we can still hear the whisper of Guinevere as a mystical white lady of sovereignty, the white phantom whose presence legitimizes kings. She stands at the heart of Arthurian myth, not just as a woman who made a choice between two men, but as the incarnation of the land's choice between flourishing and ruin. Let us now turn away from the White Queen at Arthur's side to another woman, often seen in her shadow, yet potent in her own right, Morgan, she who dwells beyond the mists. You might have heard her name before, Morgan le Fay, known in Welsh as Morgan or sometimes Morgana, and a figure who enters Arthurian legend just as you would expect a phantom queen of the otherworld to do. In the earliest tellings, she is neither enemy nor monster, but a powerful healer and an enchantress from a very mysterious isle. That same Geoffrey of Monmouth, a Welsh cleric who was writing in Latin around 1150, gives us our very first clear glimpse of Morgana. In his work Vita Merlini, or Life of Merlin, Geoffrey describes Avalon, the Isle of Apples, where, it's said, 9 magical sisters rule, and, quote, she who is first of them is more skilled in the healing arts. Her name is Morgan, end quote. This Morgan is beautiful, learned, and benevolent, a queen in her own right. She knows the properties of every herb to cure illness. She can change shape at will, and she even teaches mathematics to her sisters in Avalon. When Arthur is grievously wounded at Camelot, his last battle, it's these 9 sisters who will bring him over the water to Avalon. Morgan receives the wounded king with fitting honor and lays him in a golden bed, tending to his wounds and declaring that though his wounds are dire, he can be healed in time by her skilled knowing in the art of medicine. In this role, Morgan is Arthur's savior. And I just want to let that sink in. This king, who has stories that have outlasted time, who is called the King of Kings, the once and future king, who is the savior of so many, who has so many historic battles under his belt. His final savior is the knowing and wisdom of a woman. Morgana, Morgan, the priestess and master healer who offers a promise not just to the king, but to the entire land, that one day the king will return, restored under her care. And in doing so, she single-handedly turns Arthur into a living legend, giving the lands of Britain the prophecy and hope that the great king will one day return when the land needs him most. In other words, Morgan Le Fay is the reason that Arthur is legendary, and is the reason that his legend can continue to be a living tradition in Wales right as we speak and spend time together right now. I talk about the importance of storytelling and how powerful it can be to be a storyteller, both of stories you've collected, but especially of your own story. And I really appreciate this element of the Arthurian legends, of Morgan Le Fay. And I especially appreciate her sovereignty and her power and the respect that she gets, not because of any reason other than she is incredibly skilled and gracious and knowledgeable, and she's a woman, and she's powerful, and she's otherworldly and beautiful and all of these other things, but mostly it's indisputable that she is the best at what she does everywhere she goes. So when she speaks, people listen because she earned her place at the head of the Sisters of Avalon. She earned her Master Healer title. She's earned all of that, and she has carried stories with her the whole time. And finally, at the end of Arthur's story, it's carried on in a way by Morgan Le Fay. She decides to continue to hold, mother, and tend King Arthur and this legend. And I could probably talk about that for a very long time and wax poetic about it, and honestly, I would love to do that. But I have more to tell you about her. The early image of Morgan Le Fay is a far, far cry from the later caricature of her as an evil sorceress. Because unfortunately, they do eventually turn her into an evil sorceress figure. Guinevere becomes a cheatin' hoe, and Morgan Le Fay becomes a trifling ass bitch, essentially. And the early stories show her as a completely different figure than what most folks know her as now. The early stories show her as an otherworldly wise woman, perhaps a goddess in a human disguise. Indeed, scholars and storytellers have long felt that Morgan holds the lifeblood of Celtic myth in her veins. Her name, Morgan, in Old Welsh, likely means born of the sea, a very fitting origin for a lady of a mystical island realm beyond the waves. Welsh folklore speaks of lake fairies and water spirits called Morgans or Morwinion in some sources. Morgan Le Fay very likely springs from this well of Celtic tradition, part fae, part goddess, and very intimately linked to water and the life-giving, healing powers of the earth. Morgan's lineage and myth also connects to the ancient mother goddess figure, much like Guinevere. She's been compared to the Welsh Modron, a mother goddess whose name simply means mother, and to the early Brittonic Matrona, another great mother figure associated with rivers. Some even see the echoes of the Irish Morrigan in her, the shape-shifting phantom queen of battle and fate. Indeed, Morrigan and Morgan do share a linguistic resonance. And like the Morrigan, our Morgan can be seen as a fate weaver. The Morrigan in Irish lore presided over battles, sometimes appearing as a crow or an otherworldly woman to influence victory and death. Morgan Le Fay, in her later guises, also influences the course of Arthur's battles and tests his knights, weaving schemes that sometimes aid and sometimes challenge Arthur and his heroic companions. This connection tells us and hints that Morgan Le Fay embodies at least a piece of an otherworldly Celtic goddess, one who can bless or curse, heal, change, or challenge as she and fate demand. For a time, in the early Romance tradition, Morgan remained largely positive, or at the very least ambivalent. Quite a few 12th century writers mention her as a healer in Arthur's court, a half-understood presence on the fringes of the stories, or sometimes a famed enchantress known to all. But as the tales evolved, especially in the hands of later French and English writers, Morgan underwent a transformation. She was woven more tightly into Arthur's family. Instead of a distant fairy queen, she became Arthur's half-sister, a daughter of Arthur's mother Igraine, and her first husband, according to the 13th century prose cycles anyways. And in these stories, Morgan is raised at court, and later taught magic, by, most of the time, Merlin. Sometimes she does travel to Avalon and is taught magic there. But unlike the serene healer of Avalon that she started off as, the medieval Morgan often emerges as a very conflicted soul. Powerful, proud, and more often than not, very bitter. She chafes under patriarchy and betrayal, and in many tales, she becomes antagonistic towards Arthur's knights, and even Arthur himself. Notably, she harbors a very pointed and special hatred for Queen Guinevere, a rivalry that perhaps echoes the ancient theme of two women contending for the same king. A motif and story that symbolized the king needing to uphold certain things and stay true to what the land and his kingdom needs and remain honorable and not given to frivolous activities like wars folks don't need or making decisions that cause problems in the fields, things like that. By the time Sir Thomas Malory compiled Le Morte d'Arthur in the 15th century, Morgan Le Fay had been cast often as Arthur's enemy, a sorceress scheming to undermine Camelot. She's depicted sending enchanted garments to kill knights, stealing the sword Excalibur to arm her own champion, and relentlessly trying to expose Guinevere's infidelity to ruin Arthur. In some later tales, Morgan even plots to take the throne for herself, or uses her dark magic to trap knights who offend her. In some later tales, Morgan even plots to take the throne for herself, using her dark magic to meet her own ends. She becomes, in essence, the archetypal wicked witch of Arthurian lore. Vindictive, dangerous, sexually bold, and morally ambiguous. This change reflects, in my opinion and the opinions of other scholars and storytellers, how Christianized medieval storytelling often demonized powerful women. Morgan's very helpful healing magic, which was very accepted, wise women were very necessary parts of life, eventually became witchcraft with Christianization. And with that change and that shift, with the growing influence of the church and the prosecution of quote-unquote witches, this figure of Morgan also changed, and her independent strength became wickedness in the eyes of pious scribes. The powerful, independent, otherworld queen was recast as a jealous crone, or a fallen woman consorting with evil, a very sadly familiar pattern as older goddess figures eventually met medieval morality. Yet, as with Guinevere, these later distortions never fully erased Morgan's core identity. Through all the twists of story, Morgan retains an unpredictable duality, capable of both great good and of great evil. Even Mallory's account cannot avoid her original destiny. At the very end of the story, no matter who's telling it, no matter what version, after Arthur has been mortally wounded in battle, it is Morgan Le Fay, who arrives to take him away to Avalon, alongside 2 other magical queens. In that solemn, mystical barge that glides across the misty lake, Morgan is there, reconciled with her king or her brother, cradling him in compassion for the journey to the other world. This legend is still alive, and from my perspective, it's as if the story itself remembers, at the last moment, who Morgan truly is. The priestess who guides Arthur to eternity, not a destroyer. In the end, her legacy as a wise guardian and healer still glimmers through. Many post-medieval tales and folk legends continue to speak of Morgan as the immortal queen of Avalon, ruling a magical isle where Arthur rests, and sometimes appearing in local folklore as a healer or an oracle, long after the fall of Camelot. The people kept alive the idea that Morgan's magic was not wholly sinister. She remained the Lady of Avalon, awaiting the day her and their king would return again. My dear listener, picture Avalon right now in your mind's eye. An island of apples and mist, where time itself stands still. There, Morgan dwells among her sisters. As we approach over the water, we hear the gentle lapping of water on the shores and the faint singing of women drifting on the breeze. Avalon is a place of healing, of learning, a repository of ancient wisdom. It's said that, quote, in this context, Morgan bestows everlasting sovereignty and kingship to Arthur, end quote, by keeping him safe until the world needs him again. Imagine that. Really consider it. The once and future king owes his entire future to a woman, to Morgan. She is the keeper of Arthur's eternity, granting him a life beyond death in mythic memory. In a way, the eternal flame of King Arthur, the fact that this legend lives on century after century, is attributed completely to Morgan. I know I've said that more than once now, but I drive this home to show that the feminine current carries Arthur's story, both in the past and onward, and it will continue to do so when mortal history inevitably fails. Morgan Le Fay and Guinevere. One a fairy queen of healing and mystery, the other a mortal queen embodying sacred sovereignty. On the surface, these two could not be more different. One moves behind veils and enchantments, and the other is right there in the light of day, clearly seated on a throne beside Arthur in Camelot. Yet they are twin threads in the tapestry of this legend, each representing aspects of the divine feminine that run beneath the saga of battles and quests. Before I leave you today, let us first take a closer look at that tapestry, at the weavers of fate, and the way that women's hands guide the loom of destiny in Arthur's world. The Arthurian world is often remembered for its knightly deeds and wizardly counsel, but beneath those threads runs the quiet, enduring influence of women who shape fate. We've met two of them today, Queen Guinevere, holder of the land's sovereignty, and Morgan Le Fay, Queen of Avalon, healer and enchantress. But they're far from alone. The lore is rich with other female figures who, each in their own way, embody the feminine power behind the throne, and also push forward the adventure that we love so much about these tales. Witches and wise women, queens and quest givers, fairy maidens and crones, a hidden sisterhood ensuring that Arthur's story is also theirs, and thus ours. Consider the Lady of the Lake, often called Nimue or Vivian. She's another face of the otherworld's power, and one we've already visited. But for those who maybe haven't listened to that episode or don't know, Nimue is the one who gifts Arthur his sword, Excalibur, and with it, the right to rule. And when the time ends, it's she who receives the blade again, reclaiming that power on behalf of the unseen realms. Across Welsh and broader Celtic traditions, such lake maidens appear again and again and again, granting wisdom, prosperity, and sovereignty to those who meet them under the right conditions. These stories remind us that the gifts which make a hero are often given by the women who all too often go unnoticed. There are also the unseen weavers of fate, less clearly named in Arthurian legend, but deeply present in its mythic roots. Echoes of triple goddesses, of prophetic seeresses, of crow spirits like the Morrigan, who foretell death or victory on the battlefield. Though not always directly named, their presence lingers in the shape of the story itself. In this sense, Morgan can be understood not only as a sorceress, but as a weaver of endings and beginnings, at once guiding Arthur towards his fate and ensuring that he's carried beyond it. In Arthurian legend, we also encounter sorceresses and magical women who act both as guides and challengers. Figures like Nimue, Dom Bresson, or Morgan's own counterparts and students move fluidly between aiding and obstructing Arthur and his knights. At times they're framed as dangerous or disruptive, but from another perspective, they're initiators, setting trials, shaping quests, and testing the work of those who seek glory. One of the most famous examples of this is the Green Knights Challenge. On a winter's day at Camelot, a mysterious green-clad knight rides into Arthur's hall and proposes a very strange game. Any knight may strike him once with an axe, so long as they agree to receive the same blow in return 1 year later. Sir Gawain, one of Arthur's knights, accepts this and beheads him, only for the Green Knight to calmly pick up his own head and remind Gawain to keep his promise. A year later, Gawain sets out to meet his fate, undergoing a series of mortal and spiritual tests along the way. In some version of the tale, this entire ordeal is revealed to be orchestrated by Morgan herself, an intricate test designed to measure the courage, honesty, and integrity of Arthur's court. Beyond that, there are the unnamed women who quietly sustain the world of the legend. Healers, midwives, wise women of the woods, and those whose knowledge of herbs, land, and spirit ensures survival and continuity. A knight may owe his life not to a battlefield victory, but to the care of a solitary woman in the forest. A king's fate may turn on a warning offered by an elder on the roadside. Their magic and their influence is subtle, but it's no less essential. We have what feels like an infinite amount of retellings of all of the different stories of King Arthur and his court. And through all of them is the ancient image of weaving, the loom as a symbol of fate, story, and creation. In some tellings and modern imaginings, Guinevere herself is placed at the loom, threading a tapestry that captures the story of Camelot as it unfolds, which is incredibly meta, okay? This is such an old story. That's such a meta concept to include in these tales. Regardless, it's a quietly powerful image. The queen, who's not only living the story, but who's actively recording it, shaping it, perhaps even foreseeing it and influencing it as her hands move across the threads. An interesting juxtaposition to the knights and the kings who are facing the challenges of the world they found themselves in with brute force and violence, and who often struggle when they face challenges of the mind or spirit. In a way, one can almost imagine that every victory, every loss begins right there at Guinevere's loom, guided by hands that history rarely recognizes, but that can never really escape from. My dear listener, that's all I have for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope it made sense. If it did, I'd love your feedback. I am still putting this all together in my mind too, although I've been obsessed with King Arthur and these stories for a really long time. Putting it all into these episodes for you has been a challenge I've enjoyed. I'd love your feedback. So if you want to find how to get in contact with me, that will be in the show notes. But you can also leave a comment if you're listening either on Spotify or YouTube. And I love to see your comments, and I appreciate every single one. Until next time, my name is Wishamaya. Don't forget to keep your roots deep and your dreams wild.